I want to take a moment and thank all of my patrons for all the support. I do have a Patreon, so if you like what I do, you can support me that way, or you can also support me by clicking the like button or clicking the subscribe button. Thank you guys very much. Of all the arcane casters, the Sorcerer is probably the most misunderstood, and it's very easy to dismiss the class as a weaker version of the Wizard. The fact is, the Sorcerer is meant to fill a completely different role than the Wizard is. Despite having a very similar spell list and what they're good at, they're very good at. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I am your innkeeper, and today we'll be talking about sorcerers. In this video series, we're going to be discussing the Sorcerer class in its entirety. This video specifically will cover the overall class features. In other videos, we're going to be discussing meta magic options as well as specific subclasses for the Sorcerer. So we're going to have quite a few videos in this series. Hang in there. Each one is going to be very detailed. We're going to be deep diving into every single aspect of the Sorcerer. We're even going to do a series on each spell level and how meta magic options affect each individual spells. The Sorcerer is an arcane caster whose magical abilities are innate. Where the Wizard has to study books to learn their spells, the Sorcerer's magic flows through them, whether it's born within them through their bloodline or it's acquired through other means like encounters with some cosmic entity. Regardless, the Sorcerer's magical abilities come from inside of them. They don't have to study and learn their spells. The player's handbook is very clear in that sorcerers are very rare and are drawn to life of adventuring. So it's very common for a sorcerer to become an adventurer just because of their innate abilities. Let's start with the mechanics for the class. So at 1d6, the sorcerers have the lowest hit die in the game alongside wizards. They also get no armor or tool proficiencies and only have proficiency in a few simple weapons. So this makes sorcerers very fragile in melee combat, and I highly recommend that you avoid melee if you're playing a sorcerer whenever possible. Because their physical defenses are so bad, they do get proficiency in two really solid saving throws. Constitution is a great way to fight off poison and disease, but more importantly, it helps you maintain concentration for the spells that you're concentrating on. We're going to discuss this more in a little bit. Charisma saves aren't really common, but usually a failed charisma save means that you're pretty much taken out of the combat. This means that the Sorcerer is one of the few classes that actually has two very useful saving throws that can actually help them within a combat encounter. Not only that, but as a charisma-based caster, a sorcerer is going to have a pretty high charisma score. This makes them great at social skills, which are some of the most important skills in the game, and they get to choose proficiency in a few of them, making them even better at social situations. Starting at level 1, you get 4 cantrips. This is the most of any full casting class. Druids and Warlocks only get 2 to start. Wizards and Clerics only get 3. So this allows for more versatility in your spells that never run out versus your spells that use spell slots. Check out my cantrips video for a full breakdown, and I'll link it up here and in the video description in case you do want to check that one out. You also get to pick a subclass at first level. I can't emphasize enough how cool this is because you can actually plan out your leveling and your adventuring career much more easily if you already know which direction you're going to be headed in, whereas other classes that don't get to pick their subclass until, say, level 3, your plans might change based on items that you find in the campaign or whatnot, whereas a sorcerer, you're kind of already knowing where you're going. This kind of helps you plan ahead a lot better than other classes, where you might make a certain choice because you think you're going one way, but then something makes you veer off into a different direction, and now you have to either ask your dungeon master to allow you to change those choices or stick with choices that are maybe suboptimal for what you are now going for. The spellcasting, it's also handled differently than wizards. They're the only full casters that get to cast spells in the way that they do. They know 2 spells at level 1, and they don't have to prepare or memorize them. They basically can cast any spell that they know as long as they have a spell slot available for that spell's level. They can upcast spells if they want, but unlike warlocks, they're not required to. Now, even though this can be really handy, the sorcerers know very few spells, and the limited number of spells that they know starts to become an even bigger problem as the sorcerers gain more levels. It means that any spell that scales well when you upcast it does deserve a second look when making your spell selections if you're going to be playing a sorcerer. It also means that spell selection is a very impactful and important decision no matter what level you are. And this is where the sorcerer class is most misunderstood. The wizard gets to add more spells to their spellbook as they find them, or they can just go to the store if your campaign allows that and buy a spell scroll and copy it to their spellbook. And wizards can potentially have dozens of spells per level to pick from on any given adventuring day, making them the most versatile class in the entire game of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And they get ritual casting, which sorcerers don't get. So sorcerers weren't designed to be versatile. They were designed to be specialists. At second level, the sorcerer gets the Font of Magic ability, which grants them sorcery points. So this is what separates sorcerers even more from other spellcasting classes. With sorcery points, they can get more spell slots, making them the class who can cast the most spells before a rest that are non-ritual. They can also convert spell slots to sorcery points, and potentially granting them the ability to cast more mid-level spells than any class in the game. At third level, the sorcerer also gets the meta magic ability, which works with your sorcery points, which lets you choose a few abilities that allow you to modify spells in ways that other classes can't do. And you can potentially change the nature and usefulness of these spells using meta magic. I'm going to discuss meta magic options in detail in a future video, and I'm going to link it again in the video description as those videos come out. After third level, the base class gets no other abilities until they hit level 20. So pretty much all the other abilities that you gain from level 4 through level 19 are going to be based on your subclass, which makes your subclass selection extremely important for the mid to high levels. The 20th level ability, which is called Sorcerer's Restoration, is laughably bad. Don't expect to be blown away by it when you hit 20th level. It's really not good at all. It's something, I guess, but it's just not that good for a 20th level ability. Let's go ahead and dive deeper into the Sorcerer. Sorcerers are great at social skills, so generally you're going to be actively interacting with NPCs more than most other members of the group. You're going to be very helpful to the party in social interaction and information gathering. You're also very good at Constitution saving throws, allowing you to be in extreme cold or heat and being able to resist exhaustion and poison better than others. Based on the mechanics granted by the class, it's clear that sorcerers are good at two things with regards to their spells: blasting and control. But because they have such limited number of spells, you're generally going to have to choose one of the two to specialize in. And I say this because you get very few meta magic options, and trying to diversify your meta magic options along with your spells is quickly going to make you feel like you made a bad choice. My recommendation is that if you're going to be a blaster, go ahead and take some spells that offer support or control, but specialize your meta magic to help your blasting, and vice versa. And I'm going to discuss meta magic in more detail in another video, but this is something that can really help you focus your power where it will make the most impact during an adventuring day. So let's talk about blasting. I think sorcerers are good blasters, but they're not great at single target blasting. Blaster sorcerers are better at hitting large groups of enemies and hitting large areas. They're also good at hitting things from a distance. Meta magic features like Careful Spell, Distant Spell, Empowered Spell, Subtle Spell, Heightened Spell, and Quickened Spell are great for blasters. They can serve many uses, like ensuring a spell hits a big target with a heightened spell, taking out invisible enemy spellcasters by blasting them from afar using Subtle Spell, or to ensure they can't counter, and then also using Distant Spell to reach the enemy before they get to your group. Don't confuse cantrips for blasting though. Cantrip damage is subpar, and boosting it is not sustainable round after round, even with meta magic. In fact, I don't recommend using meta magic on any cantrip unless there's a very specific and impactful reason for it. The only cantrip damage that keeps up with single target damage classes, like fighters and rogues, is the Warlock's Eldritch Blast when it's combined with Eldritch invocations, and the Hex spell. Even a twinned or a quickened firebolt is barely going to keep up with a 5th level Warlock casting Eldritch Blast, having chosen the right invocations and such. And twinning or quickening a cantrip spell is super expensive on your resources. So in my opinion, it's rarely ever worth it. The spell points that you need to use to twin a spell, I think it's 3 spell points. That is very costly. You get very few. Even at 20th level, you're only going to have 20 sorcery points. So that's more than 10% of your sorcery points to twin a cantrip. It just doesn't seem worth it. And that's if you're 20th level. If you're 5th level, that's more than half your sorcery points. For what? So I think the Sorcerer really can't match the Warlock in blasting single target damage. Even though the Sorcerer's cantrip damage can still help on rounds when you don't have anything better to do. The blasting Sorcerer can greatly affect the combat by softening up large groups of foes as they charge towards the party, hitting creatures who are behind cover, that kind of stuff, hitting invisible creatures by affecting an entire area so you don't necessarily have to see your target, and nailing a boss with a saving throw spell if the fighter, rogue, or ranger can't hit them because their armor class is too high. And because they're mostly focused on casting spells that have a 1-action casting time, the blasters can pick a few concentration spells that help shore up other areas. So a good summon spell, if you're able to get one. A lot of sorcerers can't get summoning spells, unfortunately, but if you can get your hands on one, I highly recommend you do so. Maybe you can focus on a defensive spell like Blur, or a maneuverability spell like Fly. All those can come in handy for a blaster specialized sorcerer. And normally I say that wizards and bards and such shouldn't use up their concentration on defensive spells like Blur. But I think the Blaster Sorcerer is one of the few exceptions where it's okay to use up your concentration on defenses, because your goal is to be blasting, and if you can shore up your defenses to avoid getting killed or hit, then by all means do so you can continue blasting. And you may also want to pick up a control spell if you want, but remember that your meta magic is going to be focused on blasting, so don't expect to make control your main thing. And speaking of control, I think control is really what sorcerers are actually best at. With high constitution saving throws, allowing your concentration to remain strong, along with meta magic designed to help maximize your effects without affecting your own party, the sorcerer can be a real nuisance against enemies. So meta magic spells like Careful Spell are fantastic for control, especially when you use it on a spell where if the creature saves, nothing happens. That's perfect, because your allies automatically will succeed their save if you use Careful Spell, and only the enemies are going to be affected with this control effect. So a spell like Fear or Hypnotic Pattern, those are awesome. You can freely cast them, Careful Spell it, your party members are fine. And Distant Spell, Heightened Spell are also great choices for a controller. And of course, Twin Spell is fantastic for those single target control spells that you want to target more than one person with. Something like Hold Person or Tasha's Mind Whip, that kind of stuff. It's a real sneaky way to effectively concentrate on 2 castings of the same spell at the same time as well. So you can actually hold person 2 creatures and concentrate on holding 2 creatures without having to upcast that spell. So that's great. And no other class really allows you to do that. So that's really awesome. So the controller sorcerer is going to have to make some major decisions here. Most control spells use concentration, and I highly recommend that you limit the number of concentration spells that you learn to prevent limiting your options during a combat. If you're concentrating on one spell, every other concentration spell on your spell list is off limits, unless it's a better option for that given round. So generally, let's say you have 5 concentration spells out of 10 spells that you know, half your spells you're not going to be able to use in combat. So that's something to keep in mind tremendously when you are making your spell selection as a sorcerer, because concentration is a very limited resource, and you do not want to overwhelm your spell list with a bunch of concentration spells just because they sound cool, and then you're never going to be able to use most of them. So something to keep in mind there. So what I recommend here is for you to pick a couple of concentration spells like Web, Fear, Sleet Storm, Hold Person, and then select other spells to help you in other ways without the need for concentration. It's like Tasha's Mind Whip. That's not a concentration spell. That's a great one. Blindness, Deafness, another good one. But don't pack your list full of blasting spells, whatever you do. Because your meta magic is going to be focused on control, you don't want to be picking too many blasting spells because you're not going to be as good at it as some other classes. So spells like Mirror Image, Dark Vision, See Invisibility, Dispel Magic is great. False Life, Featherfall, and Counterspell, those are awesome choices. Shield is another one, Water Breathing, or any other similar like long-lasting or one-action, non-concentration defensive spell is also a great option here. What you don't want to do if you're focusing on control is to pick defensive spells that use concentration. So where I said Blur was great as a spell choice for a blaster sorcerer, Blur is not going to be good for a sorcerer that's going to be focusing on control. So focus your concentration on what will impact the combat the most, as opposed to self-preservation. Use your careful spell to lock down enemies with Hypnotic Pattern or something like that, or make them run by casting the Fear spell while keeping your allies safe. Now with Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Sorcerer's got the Divine Soul subclass, which opened up the Cleric spell list for the Sorcerers. I think the Divine Soul has additional options for specialization than the base class, including buffing and healing or mixing debuffing with another specialization. With Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we also got the Aberrant Mind and the Clockwork Soul Sorcerers, both of which get a ton of bonus spells, allowing them to branch out a bit more without the need to be so laser focused on their specialization. And I'm going to discuss these three subclasses in future videos, and again, I'll link them below as I release them. I'll also be going over spells for each spell level and possible uses with meta magic in future videos within this series. So the Sorcerer is a powerful spellcaster who can do some really amazing things, but it's very tempting to spread your spells and abilities too thin, creating a very lackluster character. As long as you don't give in to temptation, the Sorcerer can be very fun, it can be very powerful, and also very focused. Social skills are a big strength of the class, and specializing in either blasting or control can make you integral in winning some difficult combats. They get more cantrips than other spellcasters, which lets them diversify and pick some cantrips that others normally wouldn't have room for or wouldn't consider taking, so that's a big plus for them as well. And the ability to convert sorcery points to spell slots means that you can keep going when other casters have run out of spells, but also you can convert spell slots into sorcery points, which means that weak lower level spells aren't going to hold you back from making some powerful plays. Using sorcery points wisely is something that is learned with time. There's no set advice I can give here with regards to that. It's not set in stone. I can't just say always convert sorcery points into spell slots or always convert first level spells into sorcery points so you can meta magic. That doesn't work that way, unfortunately. One situation may require you to convert first level spells to be able to use a specific meta magic, but another situation may benefit from you converting some sorcery points in order to be able to cast a specific second level spell. Analyze each situation and determine the best use for your flexible casting, and soon you'll begin to appreciate the tactical benefits of playing a sorcerer. Now, the biggest weakness for the sorcerers are their fragile nature. The low amount of hit points and the fact that they lack armor makes sorcerers very fragile in melee combat, so you definitely want to shore up those weaknesses with spells like False Life, Mage Armor, things like that. The other weakness is their wisdom saving throws. Sorcerers are extremely vulnerable to fear and charm effects because they have very poor wisdom saves. You can mitigate this if you're able to put out a decent score into your wisdom during character creation, or if you take the resilient feat, which will grant you wisdom saving throw proficiency. Of course, the other weakness that the sorcerer can potentially have is the limited number of spells known, which can make your character feel very, very limited. The best way to mitigate that is to specialize in spells and meta magic, and that way you can be focused and be very good at a few things instead of trying to be good at everything like a wizard. So let's take a look at a breakdown of the strengths and weaknesses of the Sorcerer. So what about you? Do you have any tips that I missed that you'd like to share? Leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear about them. And in the next video, I'm going to be deep diving into the meta magic options currently available, and we're going to be going over the pros and cons for each one. And after that, we're going to be doing some videos on the spells for sorcerers and how those meta magic options can affect certain spells. And that does it for today's video on sorcerers. If you have any questions, please leave them
down there
in the comments down below. As always, I'm your innkeeper, Vase Odin, from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then. So a spell like Fear, or not Prismatic Spray, Hypnotic Pattern, yeah. So a spell like Fear or Hypnotic Pattern, those are awesome.